Good day everyone and welcome to the High Isle Guide to MagSorc PvP. As you might have heard in a previous video that I made, MagSorc right now is in a pretty bad spot when it comes to PvP. I'm not going to go in depth on the reasons for this here, I have more about that in that video, but I will link that video in the description and there will be a little pop-up for that right now in the video as well if you want to see why MagSorc right now is not that strong for PvP. Now, this does mean that when it comes to making builds for MagSorc PvP, it becomes very important to rely on those builds, because you cannot really rely on the class toolkit as much anymore. It becomes increasingly important which sets you use, how these sets work together, and how they can quite literally carry your build, your character through PvP. And that's exactly what I'm going to try and show you in this guide. I have made builds which I think really rely heavily on the sets and increasingly less on the MagSorc toolkit. Of course, it's still important that you're a MagSorc for some of these builds, they use the skills and all that, but as I will explain throughout this video, builds right now are going to be more about the sets rather than the class and the class toolkit. Now, for the main builds that I play in this patch in CP PvP, I only have 2 of those, while usually I have more, but next to that I will also have a NoCP build, I will have a dueling build, but I'm going to leave that purely on the website, I'm not going to talk about that, and I'm also going to have some honorable mentions, which is something that I had in a few previous guides back in the day. Basically, honorable mentions are like sets and some builds and some skills and all that that could be good to use, but that I'm not using for specific reasons, and I will explain why I'm not making use of those specific things for MagSorc. So as I mentioned, you can find a dueling build on the website, as well as the 2 main builds that I have here, and in another maximum magicka based build, like a classic MagSorc build with shields. That's more of an honorable mention part, but it can be nice to use when you're just starting out with PvP, so you can skip to the honorable mentions if you want to know about that last build, or just view it on the website as well. So with that out of the way, I'm going to start with the first build, which is a proc based build. As I said, I want to rely on sets, and one way to do that is by using proc sets to completely carry your offense, which is exactly what this build here is going to do. I'll start with the stats actually. So the stats are not that great, but that is also exactly in line with the nature of this build, which is just you will purely rely on what the sets do, and you will not try to get stats, maximum magic or spell damage or whatever to rely on what the sorcerer toolkit can do. That said, the sorcerer toolkit is still very good for this, as I will talk through when showing this build. So for stats we have 21k magicka, 16.3k stamina, both pretty low, almost equal as well, and then 30k health, which is just 30k is a good amount of health to have to make you decently tanky, not get one-shot super easily. And then for the magic recovery, the recoveries are pretty high, but that's also because we're using a mix of stamina and magicka skills, and having this allows you to stay alive for much longer and allows you to have lots of survivability. That said, you can drop these lowers in exchange for some damage mundus, for example, as well, because I have the H-mark mundus. For the attributes, I have 20 into magicka, 44 into health, and then I'm a vampire stage 3. But you will notice this is the case in every build, and I also have the smoked bear haunch, it's a Zorga smoked bear haunch, as a food. The sets in this build are, for starters, Savage Werewolf, that's the first proc set, and then the second proc set can be 2 things, either Drogenkin or Serpent's Disdain. I will show it here on the side as well. I have used both of these sets in PvP already. The specific gameplay clip of video that I've already uploaded in the past, I will also link that in the description, is with Serpent's Disdain and Savage Werewolf and not with Drogenkin, but after that I've switched to Drogenkin and I've noticed that works really well too. And the reasons for this are that Serpent's Disdain is going to give you a lot of sustained pressure even when you're on the defense, so increase the duration of stats effects you apply. Basically, we're going to apply a lot of stats effects with this build, and you will constantly have all the benefits of that all the time. Even if you're on the defense, it will keep on pressuring on the enemy as well and allow you to go on the offense again as well. And then Drogenkin, on the other hand, when you proc stats effects, Drogenkin is going to greatly increase the damage of those stats effects every time you proc them, and also the small dot stats effects. I will talk about that in just a sec. But basically, Drogokin is going to give you more damage when you're on the offense. When you're on the defense, these stats effects, they only have a short duration, they will drop away and you will have to reapply them again. So they're not constantly active and not constantly pressuring the enemy even when you're on the defensive. But Drogokin does have a higher burst potential, will give you more damage when you are on the offensive. That's basically the difference between the two. Regardless, either of these two sets, if you slot them here, will do the job. So this brings me to the way this build works. As you might have guessed, it is through stats effects. So Drogokin and Serpent's Dane alike are here to have a big benefit out of the proccing of stats effects, and you're going to do that with the charge trait as well as some CP that we'll go over in a second. And there's lots of things that go hand in hand here. So for starters, the charge trait, it will apply stats effects more reliably. This will be from the this will be, I think, 8 stats effects in total, which is quite a lot of pressure. So you have 3 here from Classic Sorc, which is Flame, Frost and Shock. These all proc a stats effect. Flame is a dot, Frost is minor maim on the enemy, Shock is minor vulnerability. And the light attacks, the 5-staff light attacks of Hive and Inferno Staff will also apply that little dot, but Crush Shock in its own right will get the job done. And then the next is a physical weapon, physical stats effect from Crystal Weapon. This is going to increase the penetration that you have against an enemy by, I think, about 3k. So that's a decent bit of extra penetration in combination with the 1k penetration from Crystal Weapon. And then you have the magic damage stats effect from Haunting Curse. This is going to apply minor magic steal to the enemy, which gives you a little bit of extra sustain. Not that important, but nice to have nonetheless. And then the poison glyph on the Inferno Staff. This is going to deal another little dot, just like flame damage, on top of all the pressure you're already doing. And then the last one is Savage Werewolf, which is going to deal bleed damage to the enemy, and the bleed stats effect, it's called Hemorrhaging, is going to deal yet another little dot. So you have the dot from Savage Werewolf, which is already very nice in its own right. And then in combination you have the poisoned stats effect dot, the bleed damage stats effect dot, the fire damage stats effect dot, and all the debuffs that you have on the enemy, which is quite a bit of pressure. This is what's going to give you a great amount of damage from range. And I think in total that's then 7 sets effects, not 8, but you get the idea. And then for the mythic on this build, I have Marking Ring of Majesty, basically going to give me some spell damage and some armor, useful to have. I've also tried Pale Order here, and it does heal you a bit more when you're on the offense, which is nice, but it only heals from your skills, not from the procs that you do. So that's important to keep in mind. And then to finish it off with, I have a Magma Incarnate Visage. This is heavy armor, and then the rest is 5 medium and 1 light. And then on the back bar I have a Critical Riposte Restoration Staff. You have multiple options here. I'm using this because it helps a lot with gankers like Nightblades. Nightblades will often focus on a lot of critical damage. Some other classes will do this as well. And with the 1 bar mythic that's in the game right now, Oaken Soul, this really goes extreme. So I kind of like to build a bit extra into critical damage reduction. And I'm doing this through Critical Riposte as well as Impenetrable on the gear. So yeah, full impen is what I advise for this. The other option that you can have here is the Maelstrom's Restoration Staff. That's going to give you a bit more Magicka sustain. But personally I find it quite easy to sustain my Magicka anyway, because I have a high sustain stats as well as Dark Conversion on top of that, plus my skill's not that expensive. I don't use any shields or anything. Regardless, the Maelstrom's Restoration Staff will give you some sustain, and it's always nice to have for more streaking and all that. And you can maybe switch out your Mundus then as well from the Aeternarch to a damage Mundus if you feel like it's going to carry your regen enough. And of course, I'm using Rapid Regen with this on this build. This is best for solo PvP for sure. It's a nice heal on top of Vigor, but when you are in group PvP, it is better to go with Radiating Regeneration, as Rapid Regeneration is very unreliable. You will not cast this on yourself very much, and that can really screw you over. So then it's better to have that AoE morph of Radiating Regeneration. Then for the traits, I have Defending on the back bar, Charge on the front bar of course, as I was mentioning. 3 Bloodthirsty, that's the best for damage. All the pressure that you have from the procs and from the stats effects is going to scale up more and more as your enemy drops health, and this is kind of the way that the pressure just keeps on building up on the enemy. and it is better than going infused and slotting something like Fury these days, because Fury is not that good of a set, of a skill, and as I said, I'm mostly relying on proc sets and all that, and I want to buff that, which is what I'm doing through Bloodthirsty. And the enchants are spell damage on the jewelry and full triglyphs on the armor, like that. And then that's it for the gear setup and all that. And for the skills, I've already talked about this a little bit, but Streak, of course, Crystal Weapon, Crushing Sorc, Curse, Camouflage Hunter, and Power Overload. Your main burst combo is going to be with Curse, Crystal Weapon, and Crushing Sorc. I will talk more about Crystal Weapon in the honorable mentions, but basically this is the best setup both to proc all the stats effects with in this build, but also in general for Sorcerer to deal burst damage. Camouflage Hunter is going to give me crit on the front bar, which is nice to have, but on top of that it will also allow me to use tripods instead of immovability potions, and that's how I heavily boost my stamina sustain to the point where I can easily sustain Crystal Weapon, Vigor, and Dark Conversion. And then, now down on the back bar, I have Boundless Storm, Critical Surge, Rapid Regeneration, Resolving Vigor, Dark Conversion, and Life Giver. It's nice to have a rest ult for this kind of spec. It's nice to have a panic ult, and generally your healing is not that bad because you have Rapid Regeneration and Resolving Vigor, and then Dark Conversion for a bit of a burst heal. Critical Surge is going to give you healing while on the defense as well, and if somebody is in melee range, the Boundless Storm skill can also proc Critical Surge for even more healing. You do have another option here. Instead of running Vigor, you can also run the Twilight, so you put it here on this bar instead of Vigor, and then instead of Camouflage Hunter. Then you will have to swap from tripods to Essence of Immovability as well. That gives you Magical, Spell Crit, and Immovability. But that's not much of a problem because you do not need as much stamina sustain anymore either, since you don't have Vigor anymore, and this way you have both a bit of healing over time and a burst heal. The downside of this is of course that the Twilight dies easily, especially in Outnumbered. This is not a very reliable skill, and that's why I often swap to Vigor instead, stacking the heal from Rapid Regeneration and Vigor. Now for the champion points. On the blue bar, the blue CP, one important thing I need to mention is Force of Nature. This CP goes hand in hand with this build because, as you can see, it gives about 1k penetration for every stats effects that your target has. We're proccing, it was 7 I think in total stats effects, and that will be 6,300 offensive penetration, which is a pretty big amount for a CP, definitely a lot more stat dense than the other CPs you're using here, and this will also make up for the rather low base penetration that you will have, because you will have this 6.3k from the CP, plus 3k from the stats effect from physical damage, plus 1k from Crystal Weapon, so that altogether, all combined, will give you a decent spell pen. Then the other CPs are Deadly Aim, Focused Mending, Force of Nature, and Ironclad. And then for the red CP I have Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Survival Instincts, and Relentlessness. That's it for this first proc build, and then one more comment about it. Some of you might have noticed that this is very similar to how MagSorc, so like stamina sorcerers with a bow, will build as well, and it was inspired of that kind of spec. However, I've basically translated it to a magical sorcerer build. It's got a really good amount of pressure, just like MagSorc as well, but I do feel like it has a bit more survivability, because you have all those heals you can have, on top of a rest ult as well. This is all nice to have, to keep the same amount of damage as a MagSorc, but also have some extra survivability on top of that from Magical Sorcerer. That's basically the idea here. The second and last build that I would play in CP PvP right now this patch is a bit of an opposite to the previous build. The previous build focused a lot into damage with its sets, and then for survivability you had 2 healing options, but you would also have to rely on kiting quite a bit. This build, on the other hand, is going to be an extremely tanky build. It's going to also be a slower build, more of a brawl kind of playstyle, but it will still also have a bit of damage due again to the sets in this build, and then combine that with the Magical Sorcerer toolkit to create a well-evened amount of defense and damage output for this build. So for the stats, I'll maybe start with that. It's a Maximum Magicka build with Drogokin in heavy armor and 1 shield. So the Maximum Magicka here is 47.8k, which is pretty decently high, especially that on top of Drogokin, on top of Ironblood, will make the build tanky. This is important to have because it will rely on its tankiness to stay in the fight for a long time and to be able to turn around and pressure an enemy while not immediately dying itself. So even though damage is a bit less than in the previous build, you should be able to also get kills with this simply because you're able to survive better than in the previous one, and you don't rely as much on quick bursts or a bit of offense and immediately running away once an enemy shows up. The sustain, as you can see, is also a bit less than in the previous build, but this is not a problem at all because of how much survivability this build has. It allows you to spend way less resources in roll dodging, in spamming a heal all the time or whatever, and it also even allows you to do a resto heavy attack every now and then. That in combination with Dark Conversion will give you good magic recovery, and then you also get some stamina recovery from the heavy armor on top of that, and as well just from less roll dodges and blocks needed, you will be able to sustain your stamina recovery just fine. So for the sets that wait, let me start with the attributes and all that first. So full into Magicka, 0 health, 0 stamina. The Vampire Stage 3, as always, is going to be there. The food now is the Bewitched Sugar Skulls for the maximum Magicka and all that. Also the maximum stamina, because that allows you to cast more stamina skills, which is nice. And the Munus is now the Mage, again, to get more maximum Magicka and to get a big enough shield that then gets boosted by the survivability from this build. So for survivability, the big set here is Iron Blood. This is a set that's been used in previous patches as well, and like in those previous patches, it can still allow you to have a really tanky build that can survive for a long time and kind of brawl even a little bit, just like other classes. The second set on top of that is Sea Serpent's Coil, and that's kind of the main combo of this particular build. It's going to be Sea Serpent's Coil and Iron Blood. So Sea Serpent's Coil is going to give you Major Berserk and Major Courage. As you can imagine, that's quite a damage boost that you can have, and it's also going to snare you on top of that, a 40% snare. This is just like the 50% snare from Iron Blood, but these two snares do not stack. So you can see that if you have the drawback from one of these sets, it means you don't have the drawback from the other set, and you basically get the other set for free, so to speak. And that's why these sets go very well together. And basically, by getting yourself like a one snare, you will get a huge amount of defense due to Iron Blood and a huge amount of damage due to Sea Serpent's Coil. For starters, about Sea Serpent's Coil, I'm going to continue about that. It is important, I think, to have a shield build with this, because it does allow you to heal to full every time, because only then it is going to proc. I don't think it's a good idea to run this mythic on a build that is purely relying on healing, because Magicka Sorcerer doesn't really have any good heals, and it's difficult to get to full health every time again and again. You don't really have any proper burst heals, and just this becomes a bit more difficult to use. And that's why I go with a shield, because then I can shield my health, heal underneath the shield, and get 100% health that way and proc it again. Now the other sets that are in this build are Crafty Alfiq, One Piece Magma Incarnate, and then on the back bar I have Iron Blood, with on the front bar I have the Silence Perfected Inferno Staff. This staff is going to proc stats effects again and again with this build, a bit similar to the previous build. This does give you quite a bit of damage, because you have a high uptime on a pretty decent dot for burning, and then minor maim and minor vulnerability as well. And the 103 spell damage that you have on the front bar from this is a pretty nice addition as well. So I like this to combine this with Crafty Alfiq and Magma Incarnate. Magma Incarnate One Piece is just the best One Piece, as in the previous build it's going to give an extra bit of sustain, which is nice. I do prefer running this kind of setup with Sea Serpent's Coil and Iron Blood with Crafty Alfiq. You can also do it by front barring another offensive set, such as Drogakin or Serpent's Disdain, as I was talking about in the previous build, but that does mean you're going to drop your Magicka significantly, thus reducing survivability, and I've also seen that your regeneration drops a little bit as well when you do that. That's not ideal to have, doesn't really work that well with this build in my opinion. Even though the damage may be a little bit higher, it does really give a serious kick to survivability due to reduced shield size. Next to that, the damage will be good regardless, because of the Silence Inferno and the high amount of maximum Magicka you have. On the back bar will give you a good shield, and on the front bar is still decent, will give you a decent amount of damage as well, in combination with the Sea Serpent's Coil. But I'm mentioning this just in case you do not have the Silence Perfected Inferno, because then of course it becomes a bit difficult to fill this slot here. You can do it with a Willpower Inferno, or maybe the Master Inferno or something with Clench, but it is more difficult, and then perhaps it is just better to go with a front bar 5-piece set, back bar 5-piece set, 2-piece monster set, which will probably be Tudor then, and Sea Serpent's Coil as a mythic. But with that out of the way, I'm gonna go to the rest of the build. So for the traits, I have 3 Arcane on the Jubilee. I have full maximum Magicka enchants except for 1 Triglyph on the armor. This is just to get a decent amount of health and stamina as well. As you can see, the health here is a bit lower than on the front bar, than on the back bar, by the way, defensive bar. But this is not really an issue in PvP, because when you have a shield up, it will be the same on both bars due to the Daedric summoning passive. Regardless, if you do want some more health or stamina, you have the option of slotting more Triglyphs, and this comes at a small cost in shield size and damage, but will make it a bit more comfortable in health and stamina. I'm still testing around this myself, what I like ideally, whether I just want to go full on maximum Magicka or stack a bit more on the other resources as well. But I'll leave this up to you, the viewer, to decide whatever it is that you wish here. Regardless, just with 1 Triglyph it will also work. Then for the traits, I go in mix up Impenetrable and Well Fitted. Of course, Impenetrable is still important to have against the Nightblades and all the classes that use crit damage, sometimes with Oakensalt as well. But this build is super tanky, so you can afford going with a few Well Fitted as well. This is going to allow you to be a bit easier on your stamina sustain as well. Regardless, stamina sustain should be fine, but if you can do a roll dodge every now and then on top of the tankiness, it's quite nice for both mobility and defense. The back bar trait is defending, the front bar trait is sharpened. The jewelry enchants are full maximum Magicka recovery. You could also slot Triglyphs, Tri recovery if you want, if you should notice a stamina recovery at some point. And then on the back bar, like in the previous build, I have Escapist's Poison, giving me immovability and rooting the enemy. Next up for the skills, on the back bar I have Bound Aegis, Critical Surge, Rapid Regeneration, Hardened Ward, Dark Conversion and Life Giver. Just having Hardened Ward and Rapid Regeneration is going to be a very big amount of survivability for this build because of how tanky it is. Again, in group though, it's better to go with Radiating Regeneration and then try and heal up with that, Dark Conversion and Critical Surge. But I play solo, so Rapid Regeneration it is. Bound Aegis is going to give me resistances on the back bar and a lot of maximum Magicka on top of that. This really boosts the tankiness of this build as well. I do have a source of major resolve still, that's just on the front bar here with Boundless Storm. But on the back bar I also have Life Giver, which is a defensive ultimate, goes hand in hand with this build. It's very nice to be able to tank out a lot of people and then have Rest the ult on top of that, should it get difficult at some point. With this you can then also streak out and find yourself another place to fight in. Then for the offensive bar, as I said, I have Streak and Boundless Storm, and then the other skills are Crystal Weapon, Crushing Shock, Haunting Curse and Overload. Again, the combo of Crystal Weapon and Crushing Shock is the best to use here. Curse is then to finish off the burst with. You can do a nice burst combination with Curse, Crystal Weapon and Crushing Shock. I don't have Endless Fury because, well, it's kind of just a bad skill nowadays. Plus with the Asylum Inferno, I like to just be able to cast Crushing Shock as much as I can, combining that with Crystal Weapon. The ultimate, which is here Overload, is also going to give a good boost to your damage, but if you want to fully spec into the tankiness, you can also go with the Storm Mage here. This is going to allow you to hold your ground much easier because it will provide some LOS that you can use. It's basically a friendly rock, and it will deal a decent amount of pressure to one enemy as well. The champion points in this build are for the Blue Tree, Deadly Aim, Arcane Supremacy, Force of Nature and Ironclad. I am still using Force of Nature on this build here as well because I'm still proccing quite a few status effects. And then the recipes are Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Survival Instincts and Bastion. Then for the NoCP build, I am in NoCP Cyrodiil right now, as you can see in Ravenwash to show this. I'll start by the stats. This is a no shield build. Generally I do not advise going with shield builds in NoCP at all. The big reason for that is, well, next to the fact that shield builds in general are kind of weak right now, is just that in NoCP you don't have Bastion and you also have a lot less sustain, and this makes it very difficult for shield builds to survive because of how relatively weaker these builds are compared to no shield builds in NoCP. So that's why this build too is going to be a non-shield build, just like the first build in this guide. Now the stats that I'm running, well, let's start with the stats maybe. So I'm running 30 Magicka, 30 health and 4 into stamina. This is to get a pretty even stat distribution of almost 30k health, 15k stamina and 23k Magicka. Next to that, a good amount of recovery and some decent amount of spell damage. This is NoCP, of course, so you can't get really high, especially because we are basically running a defensive set and sustain set here, because otherwise it's very difficult to survive as a MagSorc. But on top of this 4.1k weapon damage, there are some other things to keep into account as well that I will go over. So for starters, the Mundus here is the Lover. This will bring the penetration up to 5.6k almost. Vampire stage 3 and Smoked Bear Horns, so Sorc and Smoked Bear Horns again. The sustain from this food will go on top of the sustain that the Amber Plasm set provides. Amber Plasm is kind of necessary, I think, for Magical Sorcerer in NoCP, because this class eats a lot of sustain, especially when you're kiting and streaking and all that. I'm running this in as much of impenetrable as I can, because Nightblades can hit hard here as well, and the sustain is pretty good with just Amber Plasm and Zorga, so I can afford running more defense, such as with impenetrable. And the other thing that I have for defense is the Pariah set. Pariah is going to give a lot of armor, especially when you get low on health, in combination with the Undeath passive from Vampire stage 3, and thus this is also a good set to have in NoCP for sure. And then I'm combining this with a one-piece Magma Incarnate and a mythic, in this case Mark and Ring of Majesty. The enchants on the jewelry are full spell damage, the traits are infused. On the body I have impenetrable and well fitted with 3 light armor, 1 medium and 3 heavy. And then for the staves I have a defending back bar, Pariah restoration staff with the escapist poison, and on the front bar I have a charged inferno staff of the Pariah with the poison glyph. Now the reason I went with Lover as a Mundus is to get some decent penetration due to the loss of not running Sharpened on this front bar trait. But the big benefit of this is that with the charge trait I can have a lot of extra little damage procs from the stats effects, as I talked about earlier. I'm not really focusing around those with the sets or anything, but just in and of themselves, this is still a good thing to have. It will still net you the flame dot from Crushing Shock and the light attacks from the Inferno Staff, as well as the poison dot from the poison glyph here, so that's a nice bit of extra damage, and then the minor vulnerability from the shock status effect and minor maim from the frost status effect. So then for the skills, as I said, I have Crushing Shock and then Streak, again Crystal Weapon to combine with Crushing Shock and Curse. I'm using Camouflaged Hunter and Power Overload. On the back bar I have Boundless Storm, Critical Surge, Rapid Regeneration, Resolving Vigor, Dark Conversion and Life Giver. Now, just like in earlier builds that I've mentioned, you could also try changing out Vigor to Twilight in combination with Camouflaged Hunter, but again I don't like doing this because Twilight dies pretty easily, and with a setup like this you have pretty decent stamina sustain, so you can kind of afford having this as well. If you're really comfortable with stamina sustain on this build as well, with the Amber Plasm and the Zorga Smoked Bear Horns, you can actually further increase your damage by dropping Camouflaged Hunter for Elemental Susceptibility. This is going to further increase your penetration. That, on top of all the stats effects, procs and the spell damage, will net this build a decent amount of damage and pressure, while also having really good survivability in NoCP. So for this last part in the guide I have the honorable mention section. I'm going to talk about a classic Maximum Magicka sorcerer build, as well as some skills and all that. Things that I want to include as options for a sorcerer, but that I'm just not using myself for varying reasons. So for starters we have the Maximum Magicka build. I'm just going to go over it really quickly. That is 5 pieces of Crafty Alfique, 3 pieces of Ancient Grace on the jewelry and the weapons. The mythic is Death Dealer's Feet, and then a combination with 1 piece Trainee and 2 pieces Mighty Tudor. All the enchants should be Maximum Magicka. The gear traits should be impenetrable as much as possible. Ideally you would use a reinforced chest, but mine just happens to be well fitted. And then 3 pieces of Arcane Jewelry, 1 Magicka Regen enchant to try regen enchants. My Inferno Staff here is sharpened, but ideally it should actually be charged, like in a bunch of other builds as well, in combination with a poison enchant, not a shock enchant. I just haven't changed it myself because I don't play this build. And then for ending, this has defending Sonderbolt with defending one-handed weapon and a well-fitted shield, Magicka enchant and escapist poison. So for the build itself, I'm quickly going to talk about what it is and why I don't use it. So I'll start with what it is and why you could use it. It's just the classic Maximum Magicka sorcerer build that just focuses on shields, the classic thing like it has been for years. but that I'm not using myself because I simply don't like this playstyle anymore due to how ineffective it has become over the years, due to other classes becoming stronger, due to performance, and a bunch of other reasons that I mentioned in another video on my channel. But basically, other builds have become stronger than this kind of playstyle, where you focus purely on getting maximum magicka and all that, and sustain simply to focus on the sorcerer toolkit. I'm still including it because it is still, for some people, more fun to play with this classic maximum magicka sorcerer kind of build. It's also good for beginners sometimes when you just want to give a go at magicka sorcerer PvP and feel what it's like, what the core playstyle is like. This build is a really good option for it. And when it comes to this type of builds, this is the best one that I know of right now for the classic maximum magicka builds. As you can see on the back bar, I have 50k magicka, which ensures pretty large shields, and then that combined with the resistances from Mighty Chuden as well as the minor resolve from Bound Aegis will also make those shields pretty tanky. Next to that, you will also have about 30k health and 20k stamina once the Death Dealer's feat has fully procced once you're in combat for a minute, which is pretty damn good stats. So no complaining there. I think it's just that the MagSorc toolkit itself is not very good. Regardless, then for these skills, the skills that I have are Streak, Crystal Weapon, Crushing Shock, Haunting Curse, Boundless Storm, and Power Overload. The same burst combo as always. Keep in mind I mentioned that it's best to use a Charged Inferno, not a sharpened one, simply because that will allow you to proc all the status effects from all these skills, which is going to add a bunch of extra damage to your offensive rotations. And then on the back bar I have Bound Aegis, Dampen Magic, Critical Surge, or this should be Hardened Ward actually, not Vigor of course. Yeah, Hardened Ward, Dark Conversion, and Undo. So it's a classic shield build, as you can see. I'm running this with Thornboard right now, but you can also run it with a Resto Staff, and then instead of Critical Surge you use Healing Ward, and then instead of Undo you can also use Resto Ult. For the rest of the build, it's full points into maximum magicka of course, and then it's Vampire Stage 3. I don't recommend dropping Vampire anymore, not even on this kind of build, where you stay at max health relatively often with all the shields, because the shields will fail sometimes and you have to rely on your health being somewhat tanky as well. And that's also why I like having about 30k health with this build, just allows me to take some damage on that. The bonus is the Ancient for some proper magicka regeneration, and then the 2 tri-regen glyphs in addition with the magicka regen glyphs will make the sustain okay on this build. Not excellent, it will just be okay, enough to sustain all the shields, streak and all that stuff. Keep in mind that when you run a sword on the board, it's also a bit easier to sustain because you're not casting Healing Ward, which is also a pretty expensive skill in its own right, so that helps as well. To finish with this build I have the champion points. The champion points here are the same as in the one with Iron Blood. It's going to be Deadly Aim, Arcane Supremacy, Force of Nature, and Ironclad. Force of Nature again is going to go hand in hand with the charge trait, not the stats effects that you will proc with it. And then for the red tree I have Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Survival Instincts, and Bastion. Again, this build you can also see on the website, like all of the previous builds, but I'm not running this particular build. I'm just advising it to people that like to have the shield playstyle, or for beginners that cannot easily get sets like Iron Blood or some of the new mythics and all that, and want to try sorcerer regardless. So talking about that, the mythic here, Death Dealer's Feat, can sometimes also be a bit difficult to get, but it can be replaced by any other mythic that you want, or a second piece of trainee. If you do a second piece of trainee, you'll still get a decent amount of like 51k or something like that magicka. Your health and your stamina is going to drop a little bit, but not significantly. 27.6k is still really good to have. And then other mythics will also get the job done, even if that means that you cannot have that second piece trainee anymore. Without Death Dealer's Feat, you can see I'm already at 50k magicka, which is pretty high. But with that out of the way, I'm just going to talk about a couple of skills now. For starters, you have this combo I've always been talking about with Crystal Weapon, Crushing Shock, and Curse. For magicka souls right now, I think this is the best combo. It's you have a lot of options to what you can use. These other options are, for example, switching Crystal Weapon to Crystal Fragments, like the old Sorcerer skill. And for example, also instead of running Crushing Shock, you could run the Psychic Order Spamble Crushing Weapon or Elemental Weapon, but this does not work out as well. The main reason for that is just because the burst that you're going to get from this Crystal Weapon proccing twice on top of the Crushing Shock, especially when you include all the builds with the status effects, is simply going to be more damage than what other builds can provide. Next to that, you also have the fact that Crystal Weapon is going to provide some penetration in itself and its physical damage, so that is like another status effect. That status effect from physical damage in its own right is also about 3k pen, and that makes sure you're going to have a good amount of penetration regardless of what option you choose here. So even though I wish that I could use the other options that they maybe would be more effective for MagSorc as well, currently we're kind of stuck with a Stamp Sorc skill, to be honest. And when you want to maximize your burst output, and when you work like this too, you're often going to weave curse and then like light attacks with Crystal Weapon and Crushing Shock one after the other again and again, and this is going to constantly proc like one Crystal Weapon and then Crystal Weapon plus Crushing Shock, and then the curse explodes at the same time, and that's a better burst than what you will get with all the skills or with Endless Fury on top of that as well, because Endless Fury is really becoming like such a bad skill. Even if it does hit, it barely even finishes an enemy off. So unfortunately, this is kind of the rigid combo that I am using for Magical Sorcerer right now. I'm not saying that you can't use the other ones, they can be good as well. You can, I think I have a video out there, one of the first videos where I said Magical Sorcerer is bad, where I was using Crushing Weapon and Crystal Fragments. It works, but it's just not as effective as this burst combo right here. And then next to this, I wanted to talk about another type of build I've been seeing going around lately, that some people have like asked me like, can you run this or what's up with this, and that's the build with Oaken Soul, because some people like to run Oaken Soul and MagSorc with a 1-bar setup, and that 1-bar setup will often be something along the lines of like Streak and then 3 offensive skills, and then 1 heal, which is also going to be the Twilight or something, and then Overload. And if you do this with Oaken Soul, you basically have some kind of glass cannon. Personally, I would build this with building it to crit damage, so for example Order's Wrath and Medusa, I would combine those two sets, and then you would really have this pure glass cannon playstyle. I'm mentioning it here because it can be fun to use as well. You can just stand at maximum range and deal a huge amount of damage to enemies, which is very useful to have in, I don't know, keep fights or something. But for outnumbers fights, it's really difficult to play with, so I can't really go around with that. And in general, it's also a thing that while it's fun to be able to have this super high amount of damage and burst enemies easily with that, it's also super squishy, because you don't have Dark Conversion, so you can't really go and run away that effectively. After a couple of streaks you'll be out of magic and you have no way to get it back efficiently. And then next to that you also have only 1 healing skill, which is a Twilight, or whatever other healing skill you choose to slot here. But then for example the Twilight, I've talked about this before, if it dies you literally have not a single healing option left, which makes this a true glass cannon. And then next to that, even if the heal would not die immediately, you are pretty low on defense. Of course Oaken Soul is going to give you major protection and major resolve, but next to that you don't have much to go around with when it comes to defensive or utility skills, which makes you an easy target for lots of players. And then lastly, the Sorcerer combo, while it hits hard, is also very easy to avoid. So if an enemy player that you are fighting knows what to do with your combo, maybe you choose to run something like with Fragments and Fury and Curse or something, and if people know how to just raw dodge that on the right time, you literally cannot touch them while they will have a lot of time to retaliate on you, and as soon as they do that, you will have a difficult time getting out of this situation and retaliating again with your own offensive toolkit. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out as well for the honorable mentions. That's it for the guide and dispatch, so all the builds you can see on the website as well. It's all written down there with the most important explanations of this video in there as well. If you have any questions, you can post them in the comment section here or join my Discord. I'm very active there as well and you can always ask. And then lastly, I also have a gameplay video. You can find it in the description of this video, and a Patreon that you could consider visiting if you want to. I always post the builds that I plan to upload to YouTube and there as well early in the patch, and for every class. I also have things like one-on-one guidance, gameplay reviews, all that. So if you wish to support me, or if you wish to have extra personal guidance, I would very much appreciate it if you would check it out. In any case, I thank you very much for watching. I hope that your Magical Sorcerer build, whatever you choose to use, will work out for you, and have a good one. See you!